Story number 1.
A police officer went to the exclusion zone, but instead of doing his job, he started looting. He stole a radioactive couch, brought it home, and made his daughter sleep on it. And then, after long and terrible suffering, she finally died.
Story number 2.
The border between Ukraine and Poland. Polish border guards decided to inspect a suspicious truck loaded with metal pipes. After the inspection, it turned out that the radiation level of the cargo exceeded the permissible limit by 15 times.
Story number 3.
Charcoal and firewood for barbecues and fireplaces that were sold in chain supermarkets turned out to be contaminated with radiation. The radiation level exceeded the permissible limit by 4 times. People were eating grilled meat soaked with radiation during Christmas and New Year.
So, what do you think? Which one of these horror stories is true? The one about police officers, the pipes on the border, or the third one about charcoal? Unfortunately, all of these stories are true, and this is just the beginning. There are dozens of books and many documentary films about the Chernobyl catastrophe. However, today we will focus on the event that followed the catastrophe. Greed and complete absence of any principles and pursuit of profit at any cost. These are defining characteristics of today's topic, the sale of painful death.
Chernobyl, an open reactor like the gates of hell, was releasing unimaginable amounts of radiation every second. Sometime after the accident, the evacuation of the city began. People had 2 hours to pack their belongings. They were told to take only the essentials, because in 3, maybe 5 days at most, they would be allowed to return home. But, as we already know, they never returned. The evacuation of Pripyat took just 3 hours, and by the evening the city was empty. By the end of the month, the evacuation zone had been expanded to 10 kilometers from the plant, and later to 30 kilometers. That is how the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone was created.
Naturally, there were people who wanted to profit from the disaster. Unfortunately, the pioneers of looting were soldiers and the police officers. It was they who started what became one of the most cynical cases of looting in modern history.
Soldiers and police officers broke into apartments under the pretense of measuring radiation contamination levels. In reality, they were simply robbing the homes and taking valuables. One of these incidents was even caught on camera. In one of the apartments, a police officer saw a red folding couch. He stole it and brought it home. His daughter slept on that couch for some time, and later she developed cancer.
Eventually, she died in the hospital after a long and painful struggle. In addition to biorobots, various equipment was sent to Pripyat to eliminate the consequences of the disaster.
Helicopters, lorries, tractors, excavators, and even tanks. After such a difficult job, there were two options for these vehicles. The equipment that received a low dose of radiation was sent for disinfection and recycling. The equipment that was involved in the most dangerous operations was left for eternal storage, since the level of radiation received was too high and it was not possible to deactivate these machines, and it would never be possible to use this material.
После дезактивации техники на пункте специальной обработки установлено, что техника все-таки остается загрязненной.
This equipment became the next target for looters.
In the late 80s, thieves started stealing car parts from the storages. They started with bonnets and lamps. The Soviet leadership tried to fight the looters, but not always successfully.
Then 1991 came, the Soviet Union collapsed, and Ukraine was swept by chaos. During Soviet Union, the looters were a problem. After the falling down, in independent Ukraine, nobody and nothing could stop Ukrainians. New and independent country began its story.
At first, the scale of theft increased many times over. Looters were stealing absolutely everything. If before they had stolen headlights or car hoods, later they began stealing entire engines. The Ukrainian government took harsh measures to fight the looters. Thieves stopped being the main problem. Pickpockets were replaced by the state machine.
Очень большой скандал по этому поводу, потому что мы по факту предъявили первые видеодоказательства того, что мародерство продолжается и по сей день. Даже были попытки это дело замять, объяснив, что это якобы персонал зоны выполняет какие-то служебные задачи по там, дезактивации и утилизации, но не вышло. Было возбуждено уголовное дело, и я знаю, что у нас некоторые руководители страны на тот момент активно пропиарились на этой находке. И даже были после этой ситуации были приняты изменения в законодательство. Убрали всех нелегальных металлистов, завели своих и их легализовали. Увы.
The sale of radioactive products began on the domestic market and for a long time occurred almost without control. It was inside Ukraine that the main market for goods posing a radiation hazard was formed. Over time, the flow of such products moved beyond the country's borders. Radioactive goods began to be actively supplied to Russia and Belarus. However, the authorities there quickly realized what they were dealing with after the first cases of contaminated products were discovered. The governments of these countries introduced bans on the import of certain goods from Ukraine. When this channel was closed, Ukrainian authorities and related structures began looking for new markets. As a result, radioactive cargo started being redirected for export to Europe, effectively shifting the potential threat onto foreign markets.
Since 19th, everything had at least same value was gradually exported from the exclusion zone. Timber, metal, equipment doesn't matter. If it had value, it was exported.
19:20 остановлено 4 КАМАЗа трубами из цветного металла, вывезенные с территории Чернобыльской зоны.
Машина выезжала из Чернобыльской зоны, ее мерили на 2 КПП, и документы оформлены там, да, там.
Более того, 60 тонн лежит еще в Коцюбинском, которые ранее выезжали, которые уже сегодня отмечены.
Витек, ближний ряд фонит до 70, по-моему, если не рентген.
На эту машину...
Рентген, это
когда
ужас.
они
Они рассказывают
блокировали.
о том, что у них есть документы там и так далее и тому подобное.
40, 50.
45.
50 уже.
Рентген?
Ну, ребят, это Зиверт. Ну,
А, Зивертов, я понял.
И вот как бы если искать вот здесь. 40-50.
Чужая, я вам еще раз говорю.
Все отлично.
Ваша машина? Ваша машина? Ваша машина?
Ну отлично, ну чужая, так что ж ты ее защищаешь вроде? Еще один автомобиль решал. Это автомобиль, который сопровождал груз радиоактивного металла из Чернобыльской зоны.
In each video from the exclusion zone, you can see looted flats and buildings. No TV, no furniture, no cutlery. Even heating radiators and glass were removed and stolen.
Показатель мародерства в Припяти, вот если рамы деревянные на заводе «Юпитер» с одной стороны, то они целые и стекла целые. А вот с другой стороны были рамы алюминиевые. Соответственно, ни одной рамы, ни одного стеклышка не осталось.
Цифровое отопление заранее срезанное, подготовленное.
Ребят, а что вы лица попрятали? Будьте любезны, скажите, это ваш начальник там, да, сейчас ходит? Нет? Да? То есть все вопросы к нему? Понятно. А вы откуда вообще сами?
Presents have changed and boundaries as well, both literally and figuratively. The boundaries of the exclusion zone were reduced several times. Today, there are no more risers of canned equipment left. The forest area has significantly decreased. Abandoned factories and enterprises have disappeared. Everything was sold. By 2016, in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, almost nothing was left that could be stolen and sold. Parking areas filled with contaminated vehicles were emptied. Radiators and window frames were removed from abandoned houses. Workshops, warehouses, and the remains of factories disappeared. Everything that had even the slightest value was dismantled and taken away.
But for people without principles or responsibilities for the consequences, there are no limits. Then the money is at stake.
When everything around had already been looted, attention turned to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant itself. The plundering of what was considered one of the most dangerous facilities in Ukraine began. In one of the units, next to the damaged reactor, metal pipes, elements that had been part of the power plant's systems, were dismantled, removed from the exclusion zone, and sent for export to Europe. At the border with Poland, the cargo was detained because the radiation level exceeded the permissible limit by 15 times. After an investigation, it was discovered that more than 7,000 tons of metal had disappeared from the power plant's storage facilities. No one faced punishment for this crime.